Captain Jack Reynolds stared at the holographic transmission flickering before him, his face a perfect mixture of confusion and the particular brand of annoyance that only comes from being woken up during his designated nap time. The bridge of the interstellar vessel, the Underdog, hummed with tension as the rest of the crew waited for their captain's reaction. "So let me get this straight," Jack finally said, rubbing his temples. "We've picked up a transmission from a galaxy that's been dead for approximately, how long?" 3 million years, Captain, replied Vex, the ship's science officer. Vex was a proximan with translucent skin that rippled with colors depending on his mood. Currently, he was cycling through shades of anxious purple. 3 million years. And this transmission just happens to be in a language we can understand? Talia Morgan, the ship's security chief and Jack's longtime friend, snorted from her station. Not exactly. The Universal Translator has been working on it for weeks. This is the first coherent output. Jack squinted at the hologram. The message was simple, almost disappointingly so after all the build-up: beware the humans. They cannot stop themselves from protecting the weak. This was our downfall. Well, that's cryptic, Jack said, scratching his beard. And vaguely insulting? Are we being insulted by a dead civilization right now? I think it's meant as a warning to other species about humans, Vex offered, his skin shifting to a contemplative blue. Though I fail to see how protecting vulnerable populations could lead to a galactic extinction event. Maybe they were really committed to survival of the fittest, Talia suggested with a shrug. Some cultures consider compassion a weakness. Jack frowned. As the first human captain to command a multi-species crew under the newly formed Galactic Confederation, he was painfully aware of humanity's reputation. Humans were the newest members of the interstellar community, having achieved faster-than-light travel just 50 years ago. In that short time, they'd managed to annoy virtually every major power in the galaxy with their stubborn idealism and their irritating habit of championing lost causes. File it away, Jack decided. We've got more pressing matters. Like the diplomatic conference we're already late for. The Galactic Confederation's quarterly assembly was being held on Centauri Prime, a neutral world known for its impressive architecture and mediocre food. As the Underdog docked at the orbital station, Jack reviewed his instructions from Earth Command: smile, be polite, don't start any interstellar incidents. The usual. Just remember, Talia whispered as they entered the Grand Assembly Hall, the Krex representatives will be looking for any excuse to paint humans as dangerous primitives. Don't give them ammunition. When have I ever been anything but diplomatic? Jack asked innocently. Vex's skin flashed a skeptical yellow. There was the Orion incident. That was a misunderstanding. The Beetlejuice affair? Talia added. Those tentacles all look the same. The time you told the Arcturian High Chancellor his ceremonial headdress looked like something that died on a beach? Vex continued. Okay, fine, Jack conceded. But this time will be different. I promise to be the very model of human restraint. That promise lasted approximately 17 minutes. The trouble began when Ambassador Kthar of the Krex Empire took the floor. The Krex were reptilian humanoids known for their military prowess and ruthless expansion policies. Kthar stood nearly 7 feet tall, his scales gleaming under the assembly hall lights as he spoke about maintaining galactic order and ensuring resources are allocated to those who can use them efficiently. Jack might have maintained his composure if Kthar hadn't then turned his yellow eyes toward the delegation from Mira 4, a small agricultural world that had recently suffered from devastating floods. Perhaps, Kthar suggested, his voice dripping with false sympathy, if the Mirans invested in proper genetic enhancements rather than clinging to their primitive farming methods, they wouldn't require assistance every time their weather patterns shift. The strong adapt. The weak perish. This is the natural order. Jack felt his blood pressure rising. Next to him, Talia placed a warning hand on his arm, which he promptly ignored as he stood up. Point of order, Jack called out, his voice echoing through the suddenly silent hall. I'd like to remind the esteemed ambassador that the Mirans rejected genetic manipulation for religious reasons, which they have every right to do under Confederation law. And perhaps if the Krex hadn't accidentally destroyed Myra's weather control satellites during their routine military exercises, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Fares' scales flushed a dangerous red. The human delegate accuses us of sabotage? The human delegate is simply stating facts, Jack replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And suggesting that before lecturing others about strength and weakness, the Krex might consider whether true strength lies in helping those in need or in bullying smaller worlds into submission. The resulting diplomatic chaos took 3 hours to settle. By the end, Jack had been formally reprimanded by Earth Command, the Underdog had been reassigned to escort duty for refugee transports, the Confederation's equivalent of being sent to the corner to think about what you've done, and Talia had threatened to shoot Jack no fewer than 7 times. It could have been worse, Jack said cheerfully as they departed Centauri Prime. How exactly? Talia demanded, still fuming. I could have mentioned the rumor that Kthar molted in public last spring. You're impossible, she groaned. Their new assignment was straightforward enough. Escort a convoy of refugee ships from the Lyra sector, which was experiencing civil unrest. Diplomatic speak for, the Krex are annexing outlying systems and people are fleeing in droves. The refugees would be relocated to sanctuary worlds in the safer Perseus arm. The mission was proceeding smoothly until they reached the Horsehead Nebula, a vast cloud of dust and gas that would provide cover for the final leg of their journey. As they entered the nebula's outer boundary, Vex's instruments detected something unusual. Captain, I'm reading multiple ships powered down and drifting approximately 2 light minutes ahead, he reported, his skin pulsing with concerned orange. Identification? Jack asked, suddenly alert. Unable to confirm, but their configuration is consistent with Krex Hunter-class vessels. Jack frowned. An ambush. The nebula interferes with sensors, Talia added. They probably didn't expect us to detect them until we were right on top of them. Options? Jack asked. Protocol dictates we avoid engagement and find an alternate route, Vex said promptly. Which would add at least 3 days to our journey, Talia pointed out. Some of the refugee ships are running on emergency life support as it is. Jack stared at the tactical display, thinking of the message from the dead galaxy. They cannot stop themselves from protecting the weak. Was that really such a terrible quality to have? We're going through, he decided. But not without a plan. The plan, as it turned out, involved something the crew would later call pulling a full Reynolds. Using the nebula's electromagnetic properties to mask their approach, Jack had the refugee ships power down completely while the Underdog towed them slowly past the Krex vessels. Meanwhile, they released a series of modified probes programmed to mimic the energy signatures of the refugee convoy along a different route. The ruse worked, partially. The Krex took the bait and ambushed the decoy signals, but quickly realized they'd been tricked. By then, half the refugee ships had made it safely past the ambush point, but the Krex were closing fast on the others. They're targeting the civilian vessels, Vex reported, his skin now a pale, frightened white. Jack's expression hardened. Bring us about. We're going to give our friends something else to think about. We're outnumbered 3-1, Talia reminded him. Then it's a fair fight, Jack replied with a reckless grin. Launch countermeasures and target their lead vessel. Let's show them why humans have a reputation for being troublesome. What followed was 20 minutes of chaos that would later be studied in tactical academies across the galaxy. The Underdog dove and weaved through the nebula, using the dust clouds as cover while harassing the much larger Krex ships. Jack employed every dirty trick in the book, from using the nebula's gas pockets to create explosive chain reactions to reprogramming their communication buoys to emit false distress signals that confused the Krex targeting systems. During a brief lull in the battle, as the Underdog hid in a particularly dense dust cloud making emergency repairs, Vex made a discovery. Captain, I've been analyzing the Krex communications we've intercepted, he said, his skin now a thoughtful deep blue. They're not just targeting these refugees. I've found evidence of a systematic campaign to eliminate what they call genetically stagnant species, essentially, any civilization that hasn't embraced the Krex philosophy of constant biological improvement. Ethnic cleansing on a galactic scale, Talia said quietly. Jack's mind flashed back to the message from the dead galaxy. What if it wasn't a warning about humans? What if it was something else entirely? We need to get this information to the Confederation, Jack said. But first, we need to make sure these refugees reach safety. The remaining Krex vessels are regrouping, Vex reported. They appear to be preparing for a final push to overtake the civilian ships before they exit the nebula. Jack looked around at his crew, then at the display showing the refugee ships packed with families who wanted nothing more than a chance to live in peace. I know we're outnumbered and outgunned, he began. But? Talia prompted with a knowing smile. But I'm thinking of this message we received. This warning about humans protecting the weak. What if that's not our fatal flaw? What if that's our greatest strength? Before anyone could respond, the ship's communications officer called out, Captain. We're receiving transmissions from multiple vessels entering the nebula. They're answering our distress call. The tactical display lit up with new contacts, merchant ships, private vessels, even a few military craft from smaller Confederation worlds. None of them were particularly powerful on their own, but together. Looks like we're not the only ones who have a problem with bullies, Jack said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. The ensuing battle was brief but decisive. The Krex, expecting to face only the Underdog, found themselves surrounded by a motley fleet of determined defenders. Some of the arriving ships were piloted by species the Krex had displaced in previous campaigns. Others simply couldn't stand by while civilians were under attack. When it was over, the remaining Krex vessels retreated, leaving the refugee convoy to continue its journey in peace. As the Underdog escorted the civilians out of the nebula, Jack received a private transmission from a Miran vessel that had joined the defense. We came because of you, Captain Reynolds, the Miran captain said simply. Because you stood up for us when no one else would. We remembered. After seeing the refugees safely to their destination, the Underdog returned to Earth for what Jack assumed would be a court-martial. Instead, they found themselves at the center of a diplomatic firestorm, but not the kind they expected. The evidence they'd gathered about the Krex's systematic elimination of undesirable species had caused an uproar in the Confederation. Multiple worlds had come forward with similar stories, and for the first time, the larger powers were taking notice. In the aftermath, as Jack stood on the observation deck watching the stars, Vex joined him with a data pad in hand. I've been analyzing that message more carefully, the science officer said. The translation wasn't quite right. It wasn't beware the humans. It was beseech the humans. What's the difference? Jack asked. Everything, Vex replied, his skin rippling with excited green. It changes the entire meaning. It wasn't a warning about humans. It was a plea to humans. Jack frowned, taking the pad. The revised translation read, beseech the humans. They cannot stop themselves from protecting the weak. This was our downfall, we did not protect others when we could have. They weren't warning the galaxy about us, Jack said slowly. They were asking us to do what they failed to do. It appears so, Vex agreed. Their civilization fell because they stood by while others were destroyed. By the time they realized their mistake, it was too late. Jack stared out at the stars, thinking about the refugees they'd saved, the worlds that had answered their call for help, and the message from a civilization that had learned its lesson too late. Well, he said finally, I guess humans are going to keep being annoying then. Someone has to stand up for the little guy. I wouldn't have it any other way, Captain, Vex replied, his skin glowing a warm, approving gold. As the Underdog prepared for its next mission, the message from the dead galaxy was filed away in the Confederation archives. But its essence lived on in the actions of Jack and his crew, and in all the humans who couldn't help but fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves. Some might call it a fatal flaw. Jack Reynolds preferred to think of it as humanity's finest feature. I think it's meant as a warning to other species about humans, Vex offered, his skin shifting to a contemplative blue. Though I fail to see how protecting vulnerable populations could lead to a galactic extinction event. Maybe they were really committed to survival of the fittest, Talia suggested with a shrug. Some cultures consider compassion a weakness. Jack frowned. As the first human captain to command a multi-species crew under the newly formed Galactic Confederation, he was painfully aware of humanity's reputation. Humans were the newest members of the interstellar community, having achieved faster-than-light travel just 50 years ago. In that short time, they'd managed to annoy virtually every major power in the galaxy with their stubborn idealism and their irritating habit of championing lost causes. File it away, Jack decided. We've got more pressing matters. Like the diplomatic conference we're already late for. The Galactic Confederation's quarterly assembly was being held on Centauri Prime, a neutral world known for its impressive architecture and mediocre food. As the Underdog docked at the orbital station, Jack reviewed his instructions from Earth Command: smile, be polite, don't start any interstellar incidents. The usual. Just remember, Talia whispered as they entered the Grand Assembly Hall, the Krex representatives will be looking for any excuse to paint humans as dangerous primitives. Don't give them ammunition. When have I ever been anything but diplomatic? Jack asked innocently. Vex's skin flashed a skeptical yellow. There was the Orion incident. That was a misunderstanding. The Beetlejuice affair? Talia added. Those tentacles all look the same. The time you told the Arcturian High Chancellor his ceremonial headdress looked like something that died on a beach? Vex continued. Okay, fine, Jack conceded. But this time will be different. I promise to be the very model of human restraint. That promise lasted approximately 17 minutes.